Shin Junseo felt like a useless D-rank blacksmith, the kind of person who was mocked whenever he introduced himself as a hunter. Deep down, he knew he would likely die as a worthless failure. Yet he couldn't help but dream of becoming stronger than anyone. Even as a support class, he believed his life could change, if he just had the power to prove himself. Finally, after much struggle, he was ready to step into the world as a player. On the day of his first dungeon raid, Shin rushed through the forest, anxious about being late. He met up with two other hunters, Kim Jimin, a C-rank hunter, and Lim Duan, who joked about Shin's tardiness. Before Lim could elaborate on his own experiences, Jimin interrupted, reminding him that he was often late himself. Shin apologized for his delay, and the three set off together. Lim lightened the mood by teasing that Shin wasn't too late after all. And Jimin added that they could simply walk the rest of the way since Hyunwoo and Do-yoon were already inside the dungeon. Shin couldn't shake his guilt. It had been 3 months since he joined the guild, and this was his first dungeon raid. To make matters worse, he was there as a support, which meant he had to prove his usefulness. When they finally met up with Hyunwoo and Do-yoon asked if this was Shin's first raid. Shin confirmed, explaining that he was there to provide support. Do-yoon advised him to be cautious, as supports lack the combat abilities of hunters. He emphasized the importance of maintaining the right distance, close enough to be protected, but far enough to avoid getting caught in the fight. Since Shin was a maker, his role was to stay back and create daggers when signaled. Do-yoon assured him that the dungeon was easy, and that Shin didn't need to overexert himself. Just then, Lee Hyunwoo detected mana, signaling the presence of monsters nearby. Lim instructed everyone to prepare for battle, and they moved into formation. Do-yoon asked Hyunwoo for details, and Hyunwoo reported 3 small mana signatures and 1 large one, a boss monster. Do-yoon found it unusual for a boss to stray from its designated area, but decided to take it on himself, assigning the others to handle the smaller monsters. He asked Shin how long it would take to create a dagger. Shin estimated around 20 seconds, though the weapon would last less than a minute. Do-yoon nodded, satisfied, and instructed Shin to start crafting immediately. As 3 blue monsters and 1 purple boss charged toward them, Lim raised his shield and slammed it into the ground with immense force. Kim swiftly took out one of the monsters with a punch, but she soon noticed that the creatures were healing faster than expected. She warned the group to be cautious. Meanwhile, Lee launched a fireball, eliminating several monsters in 1 strike. Lim suggested that Shin join the fight, and Shin marveled at the guild's seamless teamwork. Do-yoon called out to Shin, asking about the dagger. Shin confirmed it was ready, and threw it to Do-yoon, who infused it with dark aura, and used it to decapitate the boss in a single decisive strike. After the battle, Lim checked if anyone was injured, and Kim assured him she was fine. Shin, however, felt inadequate compared to the others. He couldn't help but think he was merely a maker of temporary daggers, contributing little to the team. Do-yoon approached him, asking if he was okay. Shin admitted he didn't feel like much help, but Do-yoon reassured him, explaining that his skill required consuming weapons, which were expensive. Shin's ability to create daggers on demand was invaluable. Do-yoon praised Shin for his work and expressed excitement about future collaborations. Shin felt a surge of motivation, thanking Do-yoon and vowing to improve. As Lim suggested they collect the loot, the ground began to shake. Kim wondered if it was an earthquake, but Shin noticed a wall crumbling, revealing a hidden pathway. Lee confirmed the discovery, and Kim grew excited at the possibility of hidden treasure. Despite Lee's caution, Do-yoon and Lim agreed to investigate, urging Shin to join them. The scene shifted abruptly. Shin found himself running for his life, pursued by a monstrous creature. He couldn't comprehend how things had gone so wrong. Everyone else was dead, and this monster, something that shouldn't exist in a D-rank dungeon, was closing in. It struck him, sending him crashing to the ground and spitting blood. Desperate, Shin created a dagger and threw it, but it had no effect. The monster attacked again, slamming him into the icy ground which cracked and revealed water beneath. As he fell, Shin's thoughts spiraled. He wondered if this was how it would end, a D-rank support, unable to even use basic buffs like healing. He had finally found a guild that needed him, yet here he was, running like a coward. He questioned whether he should have ever become awakened, believing it was a dream beyond his reach. Suddenly, a screen appeared before him, announcing that he had discovered the spring and fulfilled all the conditions to become a player. As the message displayed, a bright light enveloped him, signaling the beginning of a new chapter. A screen appeared in front of Shin, displaying a notification that he had received a new reward and needed to decide whether to check it. He found himself pondering over this player concept and the nature of the reward. For a moment his mouth hung open as he considered drinking some water, but he quickly snapped himself out of his daze. He thought to himself that he didn't fully understand what was happening, and honestly, he didn't care. Deciding to act, he selected yes. Suddenly, a massive dagger materialized, forming a set of stairs that allowed him to climb out of the ice and stand up to face the monster. The system's voice echoed in his mind, informing him that he would inherit the experience of his previous life, and that the reward distribution had been completed. Utilizing his newfound power, Shin summoned several swords and launched them at the monster. The swords struck their target, and the creature was swiftly defeated. Shin was left bewildered, wondering what had just transpired. He felt unfamiliar memories beginning to take root in his mind, but before he could fully process them, the monster lunged at him again. Reacting quickly, Shin conjured a giant shield just in time to block the attack. When the monster's punch slammed into the shield, Shin was shocked to find that he had taken no damage. Despite being a golem-type monster with incredible durability, the shield held at least temporarily. However, the monster's next strike shattered the shield, forcing Shin to step back. Drawing on the information from the emerging memories, he recalled that even though it was a golem-type monster, its weaknesses and the tactics to defeat it should still apply. The problem was that the monster didn't seem to have any obvious weak points, and it possessed a regeneration ability that made it even more formidable. Determined to gain the upper hand, Shin decided to use his skill, Grid World. The skill allowed him to materialize a grid within an equal distance radius, enabling anything created within it to move freely according to his will. It was recommended that he attack from multiple angles simultaneously. Shin unleashed the attack, sending the grid to strike the monster from all sides, breaking it into pieces, and finally killing it. Initially, Shin had thought of Grid World as merely an auxiliary skill, something to help him use his creations more efficiently. However, as the skill's proficiency grew, it became clear that it could also function as a powerful offensive ability on its own. A system window popped up, indicating that the monster had been defeated. Shin felt a mix of curiosity and confusion. Why couldn't he see the information about the dungeon monster? Suddenly, a purple aura gathered around him, and a magic ball appeared in his hand. The system notified him that he had activated the passive skill Magic Absorption, but Shin still had no idea what that meant. His thoughts wandered as he tried to make sense of the memories from his previous life. He could clearly recall a future where the world had fallen, filled with horrors too terrible to describe. Somehow, he had absorbed the experiences and knowledge from that future, but he realized it might not be the same future as the world he was currently in. Many things didn't add up, and the status screen in front of him was something he had never encountered in his previous life. It finally dawned on him that he had truly become a player. According to his memories, the term player referred to those few individuals who were chosen and had undergone an awakening. In his previous life, players didn't exist. In fact, 2 years from now, only a small number of awakeners would be selected to become players. A blue screen, visible only to those chosen, would appear, and a mysterious force called the System would shock all awakeners worldwide. It sounded almost like a joke, but it was enough to leave everyone in disbelief. The System wasn't the only thing granted to players. They also received unique rewards, strength, and skills that far surpassed what they had as awakeners. These rewards seemed to come out of nowhere, and once players began using them, their growth exploded compared to other awakeners. Thanks to the efforts of the guild leader, who was one of the first to become a player, the Dome Guild the guild Shin was part of had grown into a top-tier organization. While Shin hadn't played a direct role in that growth, it had been the catalyst for his development in his previous life. Standing confidently in a developing guild, he had once thought it was convenient when he first heard about it, but now he truly understood the advantage it had provided. He thought he could check the skills he would learn, and their proficiency in the system window, which was incredibly convenient. If his skill proficiency had carried over from his previous life, the skill he had used on the golem's corpse was something he hadn't possessed back then. He hadn't heard of any other players with a skill like that, so he wondered if it was unique to him. The skill gathered energy from contaminated mana, and he had a vague idea of how to use it, but he decided to think about it later. For now, he turned his attention to the other dead bodies, deciding that taking care of them was the priority. The scene shifted to the Hunter Association headquarters, where a woman asked a man if they had simply sent Shin home. The man was confused and asked what she meant. She explained that it was strange. A small guild had attacked an unconfirmed dungeon, resulting in an accident where 4 out of 5 members had died. The only survivor was a D-rank supporter. She said she would have understood if he had run away while the other hunters were fighting, but that wasn't the case. Shin had even taken care of the bodies and reported everything to the association. Since the gate had already disappeared, they couldn't confirm anything further. She then asked the man what he thought, mentioning that something felt off. The man questioned whether she really believed a D-rank supporter could kill a hunter. He patted her head with a file and told her to wake up, reminding her that this wasn't a civilian case. Even if something strange had happened, they couldn't figure out what had transpired in the dungeon. The woman mentioned that it was troubling, and the man agreed, noting that such incidents seemed to be happening more frequently these days. He explained that hunters who found a great dungeon and didn't report it were a problem. If they reported it to the association and it went to auction, all they would receive was some prize money. Instead, many chose to risk their lives by entering secretly, as it was almost impossible for a small guild to win a bid on a gate. He told her to call him if they needed additional investigation, and she agreed. As the man left, he glanced at the file, noting that the boy's name was highlighted. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about this case. The boy's behavior during the investigation hadn't been calm, which was understandable given his lack of dungeon experience, and the fact that he had just witnessed a tragic accident. However, despite some missing details, Shin had explained everything clearly. Perhaps it was just his personality, but something still felt wrong, though the man couldn't pinpoint what it was. It was frustrating, but he decided it wasn't something to worry about for now. He would have to investigate further himself. Meanwhile, Shin was walking while using his phone, unable to shake the feeling that something was off about the unconfirmed gate. The dungeon didn't exist in the memories of his previous life, and when a guild member had checked the gate bid form, it had the association's stamp on it. Yet, it was still listed as an unconfirmed gate by the association. Someone must have impersonated the association and tricked the Doan Guild, or perhaps the association itself was involved. What bothered him even more was that this wasn't an isolated incident. As the investigator had mentioned, there were already multiple cases involving unconfirmed gates and missing people. Shin noticed a common theme among the guilds mentioned in the news. They all had players in them, like guild leader Doyun, and even prodigies who would be called heroes in the future. It seemed as though someone wanted to erase the existence of those heroes. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Shin decided he needed to hide his abilities for now. He would remain the only survivor of a missing person case that would likely remain unsolved. If he acted suspiciously, he would be caught immediately. He had about 2 years until the first player selection to prepare. During that time, he needed to use every skill at his disposal and develop even more. He had to find a way to grow without drawing too much attention. As he checked his usable skills, he found something interesting and clicked on it. A year had passed, and a group of individuals found themselves deep in a forest, battling ferocious monsters. As one of the boys struck a monster, his sword shattered, and the creature retaliated, sending him sprawling backward. He barely managed to land safely, but the monster lunged at him again. He attempted to dodge, while those around him watched in terror. It was then that they realized the monster they were facing was a Null Lord. The boy spoke up, recalling that such creatures only appeared in E-rank dungeons, and should, in theory, freeze to death. He also remembered hearing that even among D-ranked monsters, a Null Lord was notoriously difficult to defeat. The monster charged past him, targeting another member of the group. The second boy raised his shield to block the attack, but it was clear he was struggling. He warned the others that if they continued to rely solely on defense, they wouldn't survive much longer. The first boy paused to think. He remembered the grim reputation of Null Lords among low-level hunters. These creatures were not only physically strong but also resistant to magic, which was unusual for monsters of their rank. Typically, low-level adventuring parties relied heavily on magic to defeat monsters, but the Null Lord defied this logic. Hunters who were usually confident in their magical abilities now found themselves terrified, and the price for their overconfidence was often the complete annihilation of the party. The boy realized they only had one member who specialized in pure physical damage, but he was terrible at hand-to-hand combat. His weapon had been destroyed, and he had no spare weapons left. He couldn't understand why the second boy was urging him to attack the monster when he was clearly unarmed. The boy, whose name was Yan, regretted his earlier decision to minimize the number of people in the party and include a magician. He realized now that this choice had led to their current predicament. As he scanned the area, he noticed another boy mining in the distance. This boy was also a helper, but he seemed completely unfazed by the chaos around him. Yan wondered why this helper was acting so carelessly when the rest of the group was on the brink of death. He watched as the helper's weapon disappeared and began to suspect that the boy might have some aptitude as a maker. Though he didn't expect much in terms of quality, he decided it was worth asking for help. Yan called out to the helper, whose name was Shin, and asked if he was a maker capable of crafting a sword. Shin agreed, and Yan requested a sturdy, strong sword. Shin apologized, explaining that he had joined the group as a helper, not a support member. Yan snapped back, saying it wasn't the time for excuses. Didn't Shin realize they were all about to die? Even Shin would perish if they didn't manage to defeat the boss. Shin began crafting the sword, but mentioned one condition. Once they cleared the dungeon, Yan had to forget everything about Shin's abilities. Additionally, when Yan received his share of the rewards, he would have to pay Shin the equivalent of an average support member's fee. Yan scoffed, doubting the quality of Shin's work. After all, if Shin couldn't even secure a job as a maker and was stuck working as a helper, how could they expect to clear the dungeon with his weapon? Shin laughed in response, saying it was ironic because good weapons were essential for clearing dungeons. He assured Yan that as long as they had the necessary tools, they would succeed. With that, Shin began crafting the sword. The scene then shifted to the Overkill Guild, one of the 3 major guilds in Korea. A girl knocked on the door of the president's office, and he called for her to enter. She informed him that the Awakeners Association had requested their cooperation, particularly regarding a dungeon with a rank error. She agreed with the president's assumption that, while the request appeared to be for cooperation, the association was likely willing to pay whatever Overkill demanded. The president noted that the other guilds didn't have much of a choice. The girl added that there were very few Awakeners capable of entering a gate that had been forcibly closed. The president was watching the news when he saw a report about a group of hunters who had entered a dungeon with a rank error. As he looked at the group's photo, he spotted Shin and realized he had seen him before. A few weeks earlier, a dungeon with a rank error had appeared in Sukadam, and the president had been dispatched to the area. He had dropped by the scene and remembered seeing Shin there. According to the report, Shin was listed as a helper. Rank error dungeons were still rare, and survivors of such dungeons could be counted on one hand. Shin had participated in 2 parties where everyone had survived not once but twice. The president couldn't dismiss this as a mere coincidence. The girl mentioned that rank error dungeons seemed to be appearing more frequently. Just a few days earlier, an E-rank dungeon had transformed into a B-rank one, resulting in the instant annihilation of the entire party. The president remarked that the Awakeners Association must be under immense pressure. The girl added that many people were criticizing the association, as it was their responsibility to estimate, analyze, and announce the rank of a dungeon. The president thought to himself that the association must be struggling. He suggested that those in their guild with the trespass skills should take on more commissions and monitor the situation closely. He then asked the girl about the task he had assigned her, finding a weapon maker of A rank or higher. She replied that she hadn't found one but had obtained a B rank weapon from a Japanese blacksmith. She asked if he wanted to test it. The president declined, explaining that any weapon below A rank would be destroyed as soon as he used his skills. He stood up and instructed her to continue searching, as he was reaching his limit of wasting weapons. Just then, someone entered the room and informed the president, Tahin, that something had happened. Tahin asked for details, and the man explained that he had checked the location of the dispatch request sent by the association. It turned out to be a D-ranked dungeon where some of their new recruits had entered as part of a free attack team. Tahin asked about the measured ranks after the entries, and the man revealed that the dungeon had been reanalyzed as a C rank or upper C rank. Tahin, looking serious, stated that he couldn't afford to lose his new recruits. It was an urgent situation, so he decided to go there himself. The scene shifted to the dungeon gate, where the media was reporting on the situation. The crowd saw President Tahin, accompanied by the girl and the man who had informed him of the crisis. Reporters began asking Tahin to comment on the ongoing issue of rank error dungeons. One reporter mentioned that the association had sent a cooperation request to Overkill for the dungeon entry, and asked if that was the reason Tahin had come in person, because his guild members were part of the attack team. A woman thanked Tahin for coming and revealed that the attack team consisted of 6 hunters, 2 supporters, and 1 helper. All of them had higher than required qualifications. But those numbers didn't matter now, as the dungeon had been reanalyzed as a C rank. Tahin asked how long it had been since the attack team entered, and the woman replied that it had been almost 2 hours. Tahin stated that he didn't know how many were still alive but would do what he could. Tahin, along with Min Husu, the girl who had accompanied him, stood in front of the dungeon gate. She handed him a sword, and he used his skill, Trespass, to slash through the air, creating a flare of energy that caused a strange black area to appear ahead. The skill allowed him to forcefully push through barriers, including dungeon gates, but it only affected the user, not the surrounding area. The sword broke as a result. After handing it back to Min, Tahin told her to be careful, and she wished him the same. He then entered the dungeon. Inside, Tahin noted the humidity, temperature, and foul smell, deducing that the dungeon was inhabited by some kind of reptile. The absence of pollutants on the floor suggested that the monster had a level of intelligence. Based on the dungeon's rank, he concluded that the monster was a lizard man. As he moved forward, he crossed numerous dead bodies of monsters, using the lizard man corpses to estimate the size of the group and their fighting capabilities. He also noted the level of distress the party had been in, as identified in the preliminary report. He feared the worst-case scenario that they were all dead by now. Suddenly, he heard a rumbling sound. Moving closer, he arrived at the location of the party and saw something he hadn't expected. A monster was attacking a hunter with a sword, while the other hunters continued to battle. Tahin observed from the side, noting that the lizard men were clearly overwhelming the group. Their speed and movement indicated that they were far stronger than the hunters. He saw one of the lizard men strike a hunter's sword, sending it flying. The monster was about to attack the unarmed man when Shin appeared, using his magic to create a sword out of thin air and block the blow. Tahin, still some distance away, wondered if it was magic. How else could a weapon materialize so suddenly? He watched as Shin used his abilities to craft the sword, and their eyes met in a brief but intense moment of recognition. Shin quickly counted the people around him. When he reached Tahin, the 10th person, he remarked that he was certain only 9 had arrived. Tahin, confused, wondered what Shin was talking about. Just then, another lizard man knocked a hunter back and prepared to attack. Tahin rushed in with his sword to intervene. Shin was astonished that Tahin had come to rescue them personally, especially since he was carrying a weapon he didn't even use. Shin speculated whether it might be a sphere weapon. Tahin blocked the lizardman's attack with his sword and ordered the others to fall back. With a swift motion, he unleashed a series of slashes, creating flares with his sword that cut down the lizardmen instantly. Tahin thought to himself that he hadn't even used his full strength yet. The weapon was clearly B rank, but it felt surprisingly weak to him. As Tahin defeated the lizardman, another one appeared and lunged at him. Tahin dodged the attack, causing the lizardman to crash to the ground. Shin approached Tahin and asked if this kind of wear and tear always happened when he used his skills, commenting that it seemed like the weapon suffered serious damage. Tahin wondered if Shin was trying to pick a fight with him. Shin then called out, urging Tahin to use his weapon properly and avoid destroying any more of the fragile weapons. Tahin was taken aback when Shin materialized a weapon with a single gesture. Not only was Shin a weapon maker, but he was also exceptionally skilled and competent far beyond the average. Tahin couldn't comprehend why someone so talented was acting as a mere helper. He had heard that low-grade supporters often took on helper roles due to financial constraints. Shin took Tahin's weapon and mentioned that there would be a condition. Once Tahin cleared and left the dungeon, he had to forget everything about Shin's skills and Shin himself. Tahin raised an eyebrow, asking if Shin thought he could simply forget because Shin wanted him to. Shin replied that if Tahin didn't agree, he could go ahead and smash all his high-class weapons. Tahin considered the offer. He knew the weapon might break the moment Shin used a skill on it, but having more weapons couldn't hurt. Reluctantly, Tahin agreed, promising to forget about it. Shin smiled, saying that was great, and told Tahin to go wild. Tahin rushed to attack the lizardman, flaring his sword and breaking the monster's weapon. Shin watched in surprise, having expected Tahin to merely deflect the attack. Instead, the opponent's weapon was destroyed first. Tahin's control over his weapon was far beyond what Shin had anticipated. Shin wondered if Tahin's weapon was just that much stronger. Intrigued, Shin thought to himself that the weapon maker must be capable of manifesting at least a B-rank weapon on the spot. This was getting interesting. Shin decided to test the weapon's capabilities further. He cranked up the power, stabbing the lizardman and using a fire blast. After that, he jumped behind the lizardman, stabbed the weapon into its head, and released another blast of fire. The lizardman spat out green blood as it collapsed. Tahin stood there staring at the weapon Shin had made, now covered in blood. To his surprise, there wasn't a single scratch on it. Before he could ponder further, the newbies from his guild appeared, calling out to him. They thanked Tahin, saying it was because of him that they were alive and safe. Tahin replied with relief, noting that none of them seemed badly hurt. They explained that they hadn't been able to fight with their own weapons, but had managed to hold out thanks to Shin. Tahin turned to Shin and asked for his name. Shin wondered why Tahin would want to know the name of a mere helper. Tahin replied that they should at least know each other's names and introduced himself. Finally, Shin approached and introduced himself as well. He mentioned that he would leave the magic stones at the dungeon's entrance. The others agreed, but Tahin asked Shin to accompany him to the boss room. Shin hesitated, stating that he was just a helper. Tahin insisted, explaining that the dungeon had turned into an error dungeon, meaning no one could leave unless the boss was defeated, whether they were a helper or a supporter. Shin responded by saying that Tahin was more than capable of taking down the boss himself. Tahin countered, pointing out that, as Shin had seen earlier, no other weapon could handle his skills. No matter how skilled Shin was, it would be pointless if he just ended up smashing the weapon Shin had made for him. Shin assured him that the weapons he made wouldn't break. Tahin argued that while Shin might believe that, this was an error-class dungeon. The creatures here were far beyond the average lizardman, and if the boss was as strong as he feared, no amount of caution would be excessive. Shin eventually agreed and began moving, his steps echoing as he followed Tahin. When they reached the boss room, they encountered the Lizard King and another lizardman. Tahin suggested that Shin should disregard any previous danger levels or information he had, and focus on ending the fight as quickly as possible. He warned that if they took too long, his weapon might snap in two. Shin once again assured him that the weapon wouldn't break, and added that if Tahin didn't believe him, he could test it out himself. The Lizard King commanded his minion to attack, and the lizard lunged forward with its paw. However, Shin and Tahin skillfully dodged the strike. Tahin then charged with his sword, but the lizard used its power to overwhelm him with intense pressure. Disoriented and unable to comprehend what was happening, Tahin leapt into the air. The lizard followed, attempting to strike Tahin's weapon. After the clash, Tahin was sent flying into the sky. The Lizard King swiftly climbed onto the lizard's head, and the creature unleashed a powerful flame attack toward Tahin. Just in time, Shin created a protective shield barrier around Tahin. The lizard retaliated, knocking Shin back. Still in the air, Tahin turned to Shin and asked, "Wasn't that the one who makes weapons?" Shin replied, "A shield can be a weapon too. Haven't you been hit by one before?" Tahin flared his sword, promising that once they got out of there, he would have plenty of questions for Shin. The Lizard King then conjured a long chain to strike Tahin. However, Tahin effortlessly stopped the chain with his fist, causing it to wrap around his sword. As the lizard tugged on the chain, Tahin was pulled closer. Shin, urging Tahin to focus, told him to stop playing around and fight properly. In response, a second sword materialized in Tahin's other hand. Tahin, noticing the new weapon, questioned, "Didn't you tell me to test him? Shouldn't it be something for a pet?" The weapon captured by the chain vanished, and Tahin used his second sword to strike the lizard with several swift slashes as he closed in. The Lizard King watched intently, but Tahin threw his sword at him, followed by a powerful kick that sent the Lizard King reeling backward. Furious, Tahin leaped into the air, his sword flaring with energy as he prepared to attack again. The Lizard King, now focused on Shin, attempted to strike him, but a transparent barrier appeared, protecting Shin. Growing angrier, Shin wondered aloud if the Lizard King really thought he could threaten him with webs. Tahin, equally enraged, stood ready for the next move. After a while, the entrance to the dungeon, which had been glowing red, shifted to a calm blue. Outside, people began to wonder if the dungeon had been cleared. As the group emerged, reporters rushed over to Tahin, bombarding him with questions about the dungeon's interior, the boss monster, and whether everyone had been saved. Min approached Tahin, asking if he was injured. Tahin reassured him, saying that he was completely fine. The hunters surrounding him praised his efforts, with one girl mentioning that if it weren't for him, they would all have perished. Meanwhile, Shin handed the team leader a bag of magic stones, explaining that he had already received his payment in advance, and was leaving. The team leader expressed his gratitude for Shin's hard work, without acknowledging Tahin. Shin silently left the area. The reporters then turned to Tahin, eager to know how he had managed to clear the dungeon so quickly. They suggested that the dungeon must have been easy for him. Tahin shook his head in disagreement, and just as he was about to mention Shin's role, he realized that Shin had already gone. A girl spoke up, commenting that while everyone else had been blocking and working together, Tahin had handled the majority of the threats on his own. She asked Tahin how everything had gone. A boy chimed in, expressing that all of their weapons had been destroyed, and that he had no idea how dangerous the situation had been. He added that if it weren't for Tahin, they would have all been wiped out long ago. Tahin, slightly confused, asked the boy what he was talking about. The boy explained that when it came to the weapons, it was thanks to the person who had been crafting them for the group, which allowed them to last as long as they did. He apologized to Tahin and inquired about the support who had come as a helper and weapon maker. The boy seemed unsure about the weapon maker, acknowledging that the helper was indeed a support role, but wondering if that person had any special abilities. The girl replied that she wasn't sure about that. Tahin, still puzzled, asked the others if they hadn't all seen how the helper made the weapons. The others were confused, wondering if he was referring to the pickaxe. Tahin didn't believe that person even carried a pickaxe, but he had brought it and used it, though they must have lost it along the way. Tahin then realized that the person had mined all the mana stones. As Tahin wondered what was happening, he remembered that they had all received weapons from the same person, yet it felt as if they had forgotten that fact. He recalled Shin giving him a sword and telling him to forget everything related to his abilities. Tahin then thought about the rental pay, and how the person had used a skill exclusive to an A-rank or higher maker. Just then, a man called out to him, and Min noticed something was off. Tahin handed a container to the man, then turned and left to search for Shin, wondering where he had gone and if he had already left. Meanwhile, Shin had been hiding while Tahin searched for him. Min and the man approached, asking Tahin what was wrong. Tahin called out to Min, telling her that he needed her to find someone for him. As Tahin sat in his guild office, several men arrived with information about Shin's location. They reported that around 10 warriors that same day, Shin, accompanied by a 5-member team, had entered a D-rank dungeon near Sampo. Tahin nodded in agreement, mentioning that Sampo wasn't too far away. The men hesitated before asking him a question. One of them inquired why Tahin was so interested in a D-rank maker like Shin. Tahin pondered for a moment, wondering if that was how it appeared to her. He reflected on how, on the surface, It was easy to dismiss Shin based on his status and background, which clearly indicated he was a D rank. However, Tahin knew better. The rental pay skill alone disproved everything. The level of skill in that ability was beyond anything Tahin had ever seen before. It wasn't just an ordinary skill. It was something with the potential to bring about great fortune. Yet it seemed that Shin was using it only to conceal his true identity. A weapon maker with such talents could easily reach a level far higher than D rank. And Tahin was certain he would understand more when he finally met Shin again. At that moment, he would no longer feel the same doubt. Tahin would be able to use his full power without worrying about the weapon breaking. Over the years, Tahin had encountered countless blacksmiths who were considered great artisans. But none of their creations had ever met his expectations. He had tested the weapons of renowned blacksmiths, but every single one had eventually broken, unable to withstand his power. To make matters worse, the weapon-making abilities of most creators were limited to traditional forms of weapons. However, Shin's abilities were clearly something different. The weapons created by Shin far exceeded the limitations of ordinary abilities and weapon forms. It was as if those limitations simply didn't exist with Shin's abilities. Even the most difficult feats were possible things that Tahin hadn't been able to accomplish before, simply because he lacked the right weapon. Tahin considered the usual clearing time for a D-rank dungeon by a 5-member party. It typically took around 4 hours, and they had only 1 hour left. He then turned to Min and asked about his schedule for the day. She informed him that at 7 p.m., he had a meeting with the guildmaster, Kimu. Tahin decided to leave, instructing Min to cancel the meeting, as he needed to leave ahead of time. He wanted to avoid any chance of missing Shin. The scene shifted to the dungeon, where a boy in armor had just defeated a boss. He was in shock, realizing that the ribbon used by the helper was indeed made by Shin. If such mana could destroy a boss weapon, Shin must surely be at least B rank. When the man's weapon shattered into 2 pieces, the boy thought they were done for. However, to his surprise, he hadn't anticipated that the person who had entered as a mere helper would possess such an incredible ability. He marveled at the quality of Shin's work, admitting he had never seen anything like it before. Grateful, he thanked Shin, acknowledging that if it weren't for his help, they would have failed. He suggested that they should recruit him. A girl nearby agreed, commenting that it was a shame Shin was still going around as just a helper. The boy agreed, noting that Shin certainly had a good eye for this kind of thing. Shin, however, was deep in thought. He realized he had used more mana than he had anticipated. He hadn't expected to encounter a party struggling so much, especially since it wasn't an error dungeon. As he began collecting the magic stones, he thought that if only he had just a little more mana left back then, things wouldn't have gone so poorly. He recalled the intense heat that had filled the dungeon earlier, especially after defeating the golem. Once he had used up all his mana, the heat dissipated and never returned. The mana he felt now was no more powerful than that of a typical D-rank awakener. Still, there was relief that he hadn't encountered any major problems while crafting the weapons. Shin also reflected on how his past life memories had helped him in ways he hadn't expected. The maker's basic skill, creating, was designed to aid in the creation of specific objects. It was a highly intuitive skill, where the quality of the item created was directly proportional to the mana used. However, there was still one unknown aspect. Another method that could enhance the performance of the skill, which Shin had yet to uncover. What he did know was that the deeper his understanding of the object he was crafting, the higher the quality of the creation. The most remarkable aspect of the ability was that as the quality of the item increased, the efficiency of the mana also improved. This meant that even when using the same amount of mana to create identical objects, the quality would vary meaningfully based on the creator's level of understanding. After his hidden ability was revealed, Shin found himself reflecting on the various training he had undergone. He remembered his horse training, the material research, the lessons he received from a hunter as a support, and his time spent in the workshop learning the intricacies of crafting. Despite all this, the excitement he felt was more intense than he had expected. He continued mining, thinking that while he didn't know exactly how much better his abilities would become, he knew that in comparison to the mana he was using, the quality was improving. However, it was clear that there were still limitations, both in crafting and in using the rental pay skill. The process was still clunky, and he struggled to use both abilities effectively at the same time. As he gathered the magic stones, he thought about how expensive mana-related equipment was. That was why, for the time being, he couldn't afford to purchase any of it. Just a few more mana points, he thought, knowing that mana-related items were among the few things that could be mass-produced. He made a mental note to order more potions. Although his earnings as a helper were modest, he was still struggling to get by. No one would accept a D-rank maker as a full-time support, so he didn't have many options. But at least the results of his efforts were promising, and for that, he was relieved. He opened his status window and saw that there was only a small amount left until he reached his mana absorption goal. About 20% remained. He realized that a few dungeon clears wouldn't be enough. A single mana clear only contributed just over 1% of the total mana, and the efficiency was far too low. The only remaining option, it seemed, was to enter an A-rank error dungeon to absorb a large amount of mana at once. Entering the ranker dungeon was the only method. Unlike other dungeons, it allowed for significantly more mana absorption, which was exactly what he had been seeking. The problem was that he couldn't predict the difficulty of the ranker dungeon before entering. It would have been tough without Tahin's presence, as the previous experience had proven. He concluded that there would likely be at least a C-rank boss, and so he needed to prepare accordingly. The only way to grow as a D-ranked awakener, for now, was to focus on the rewards gained from mana absorption. The team leader acknowledged their efforts and appreciated their work. As they were leaving, he mentioned they would meet again in the future. Shin felt satisfied that he had created lasting memories with them. Just then, Tahin caught up to him and asked if Shin remembered him. Shin realized his efforts hadn't had much impact, and, in response, asked Tahin if he would believe him if he said he didn't. Tahin responded by handing him a card. Shin inquired what kind of work Tahin wanted from him. Tahin explained that he had something important to discuss, which was why he was asking for a little of Shin's time. When Shin saw the Overkill Guild name on the card, he recognized it as one of the top 3 guilds in Korea. He knew he wasn't in a position to get involved with such a prestigious guild yet, so he needed to find a way to politely decline. Shin claimed he didn't have any time, mentioning a prior dinner appointment. However, as he tried to leave, Tahin placed a hand on his shoulder and insisted that Shin wouldn't regret the conversation. Tahin assured him it would be quick, and even offered to treat him to dinner. Shin retorted, noting that as the guildmaster, Tahin must have plenty of time. Unlike a low-ranked supporter like him, Tahin admitted this was true. Shin wasn't thrilled about it, but he realized he needed to gauge how much the rental fee had affected Tahin. Reluctantly, he agreed to talk for a while. The 3 of them went to a traditional house for dinner, and Shin asked what business the guildmaster of the Overkill Guild could possibly have with a D-ranked supporter like him. He suspected it was simply because Tahin had too much free time and wanted to make small talk. However, Tahin explained that, as Shin had noticed, his class was Berserker. While this granted him overwhelming attack power, it also came with a limitation. Few weapons were capable of withstanding the immense force of an Emperor Berserker. Finding a weapon supplier that could match his needs was crucial, and Tahin had been searching tirelessly. He had visited countless places, both within and outside the country. From the best blacksmiths to the most renowned weapon makers in the field, he had left no stone unturned. If there was even the slightest chance a weapon could meet his requirements, he would commission it without hesitation, regardless of time or cost. Yet, every weapon he had used until then had been unable to withstand his full power, except for one, a sword created by Shin. Shin realized then that the rental payment hadn't affected Tahin at all, and he didn't believe there was a nullification skill in the Berserker class. Tahin's careless confidence made Shin wary. He knew he would need to be cautious when using such a strategy with a higher-level hunter. Sensing the change in Shin's demeanor, Tahin decided to be more direct. He asked if Shin would be interested in joining his guild, knowing that Shin wasn't currently affiliated with any. Tahin promised that if he joined, Shin would receive the best possible treatment. He offered Shin a contract fee of 10 billion, along with separate payments for operational expenses and dividends. The contract would be for 1 year, and each time it was extended, the fees would increase by 10. Just as Tahin was about to explain that the exact details would be in the contract, Shin quickly apologized, stating that he had no intention of joining a guild, and would have to decline the offer. With that, Tahin had nothing further to discuss. Shin stood up to leave and thanked him for the meal. Tahin called out to him once more, but Shin didn't stop. Min, who had been quietly observing, asked Tahin why he had made such an offer to Shin. There seemed to be no clear reason for it, yet the conditions were trivial. Tahin responded by saying that if Min were in his situation like Shin, she wouldn't question the offer. He continued, mentioning that while the weapon Shin had created hadn't fully reached his potential, it was the first one that felt like it could withstand everything he had to give. Min hesitated, still unsure, but Tahin pressed on. It wasn't just about the sensation of the weapon itself. He asked her to consider the total sum of all the high-level weapons he had destroyed over the past year. Min realized then that the guildmaster's expenses on weapons were astronomical, especially when factoring in the cost of those weapons being destroyed because they couldn't handle the pressure. If a weapon wasn't above a certain rank, his abilities wouldn't even be fully unleashed. Min then remarked that if that were the case, the contract fee Tahin offered would mean very little. However, The issue until now had been that no one, not even those considered the best in the field, had been able to craft a weapon that could withstand such power. Taehin responded by explaining that the fact Shin had this ability was exactly why he wanted to recruit him at any cost, regardless of the offer he made. As Shin walked away, he thought to himself that there might come a day when he would have to turn down an offer from one of the top 3 guilds, the Overkill Guild, and from Taehin himself. While the offer was tempting, he knew it was still too early for him. He decided to wait patiently, certain that Taehin would come back to him again. The scene then shifted to a dungeon where several goblins were being slain. Suddenly, one boy's arm was severed by a mysterious figure. Another boy, witnessing this, asked the man who he was. The man wielded a giant sword, and his actions were so striking that they would be remembered for a long time. At a moment like this, most people would be whining or begging for their lives, losing consciousness from the pain. But this person, the one who would eventually become a hero, was different. He stabbed the first boy, killing him without hesitation. The second boy, stunned and confused, wondered what had just happened. Was the man trying to kill them all and take their trophies? The man, not concerned with such a mundane reason, responded that it wasn't his intention to explain himself. He saw it as a waste of energy to explain anything to someone who was about to die, but he would share everything if the boy managed to defeat him. So, the boy had better hurry and try. The boy realized the man was not an easy opponent. At this ambiguous distance, he would surely die. So he resolved to either lose an arm or a leg in an attempt to fight back. He charged at the man. But the man blocked the attack effortlessly with his massive sword, and swung it back with such force that the boy's sword was sent flying into the air. The boy was stunned. The man then kicked the boy with such strength that he was knocked back. Disappointing, the man muttered. Excited by the fight, he said it was his first hero-ranked subjugation in a year. However, to think that the boy was such an insignificant opponent was a letdown. Still, he commended the bravery it took for the boy to challenge him. The boy, now on the ground and realizing his fate, pleaded for his life. The man coldly replied that he would send the boy off cleanly, and with that, he slashed him dead. As the boy fell lifeless, the man moved forward, reflecting that he had hoped for a more challenging fight. It hadn't even served as a decent warm-up. The boy had worn an unfair expression in his last moments, but there was no need for concern. The report would make it clear that they had fought valiantly against the boss and died heroically. He tossed the dead body of the boy aside, remarking that this was a common occurrence in a rank error dungeon. He checked the collection of photos of the deceased, noting that his collection was growing, and that he lived for moments like this. The only thing that felt strange to him were the heals. The energy they gave off unsettled him. He told her to hide them for now, or at least make it less obvious. When the priestess arrived, she emerged, apologizing for the delay. She explained that she had come in haste because there were precious ingredients nearby. He raised an eyebrow, wondering what could possibly be so valuable, but he dismissed it, thinking that all those people were idiots. That's why he had warned her not to listen to the priestess and to wait a little longer. She wondered aloud about his words and asked if he was implying that he wanted to go against the wishes of the executive. He scoffed and referred to the executive as a sensitive bastard, explaining that he was simply suggesting they clean up the situation first. She offered to handle it, assuring him it was her specialty. He reminded her not to forget their promise, that she would let him face an S-rank hunter, and that was the only reason he had been associating with her. He also added that he hadn't been able to fully unleash his power yet, and wanted the opportunity to do so without any hesitation. She agreed, reassuring him not to worry, as she would contact him soon. She tore open the belly of the dead body, wondering what would emerge next. Suddenly, a monster appeared from within the corpse. Her eyes lit up with excitement as she called it, the child, confirming that the Excelsior had been right after all. The scene shifted to a portal where a group of hunters was gathered. Shin approached a man who was concealing his face with a mask and carrying a weapon case. He was visibly surprised when he saw the man, and it was none other than Taehin. Taehin seemed just as surprised to see Shin, and wondered aloud why he was there. Shin asked him why he had come, and Taehin replied with a grin, noting that Shin had a good eye for recognizing him. Shin explained that he only knew one person who carried a weapon case like that, and then asked Taehin again why he was there. Taehin responded that he was there to attack the gate. Shin raised an eyebrow and asked why a D-rank gate, of all things. Taehin explained that the guild member who was supposed to enter had suddenly fallen ill, so he was filling in as their substitute. Before Shin could say anything more, a man called out to them, urging everyone to head inside. Taehin turned to Shin and said, "Let's get going." As they began to move, Shin couldn't help but think to himself that he knew Taehin would show up eventually, but he hadn't expected him to be so quick. Now, he would have to adjust his plans accordingly. They all finally entered, and Tahin turned to Shin, asking why he had refused to join the guild. Shin replied that he had already rejected the offer and didn't want to discuss it any further. A boy asked a girl if she had heard about the auction for the C-rank gate that had taken place that morning in Chunshin. The girl confirmed, and the boy told her he had heard that the Hewn Moon Guild had acquired it in one go. She agreed, mentioning that her friend was there, and had heard the bidding had reached such a high price that no one else dared to compete. Shin, overhearing this, thought to himself that the Hewn Moon Guild had purchased a C-rank gate, and he wondered if they had found something special inside. Tahin then asked Shin if he was interested in buying gates himself. He explained that if Shin joined their guild, he would easily be able to acquire special gates above B rank, as there were certain privileges that came with the guild's name. Shin reflected on Tahin's words. To most awakeners, the name of their guild was of utmost importance. It not only brought them the envy and admiration of the public, but also granted them opportunities for other lucrative jobs, along with incomparable revenue and rewards. Furthermore, their vested rights within the guild allowed them access to countless privileges for high-level special gates. The guild members could secure entrance tickets, and their influence wasn't determined solely by talent. Political connections played a major role in gaining access to these opportunities. This structure meant that rare treasures, those that could be earned through such gates, would naturally fall into the hands of the larger guilds. Tahin told Shin that, as an awakened, he must have a goal he was working toward. Whatever that goal was, with the backing of Overkill, it would be easier for Shin to achieve. He couldn't understand why Shin would reject such an offer. Shin coldly responded that it was none of Tahin's business. He vaguely knew what he was doing, and since there had probably never been anyone who had rejected an offer from the Overkill Guild, he wanted to make it clear, no matter what, he was not going to join any guild. Tahin wondered aloud if Shin's rejection was due to some trauma from the annihilation of the Doan Guild, which he had read about in the report, or if there was another reason. Whatever it was, Tahin wasn't going to give up so easily. As they continued ahead, a boy was visibly frightened by the sight of spiderwebs covering the ceiling. They pressed on, and soon, the man spoke up, telling them that they were about to enter the monster's territory. Noticing the group's inexperience, he quickly began to explain the situation. He started by confirming that they had all received the reconnaissance report. The monsters they would face were legion spiders. The level of difficulty for each individual spider was low, but their special traits made them a threat. These spiders lived in groups, and the reconnaissance report indicated that there were approximately 50 of them, which wasn't an overwhelming number. However, they possessed paralysis poison in their fangs, so the man warned them to be careful not to get bitten. Tahin made a sound and quickly told everyone that the monsters were coming soon, urging them to stick close to him. Shin, unfazed, replied that they didn't need to worry about the support and helpers. They should just prepare for the fight. Tahin, however, addressed the team's competency, reminding them that it was essential to protect the support and helpers. It was a rule hunters had to follow, no matter their abilities, the situation, or whether they agreed with it. Shin scoffed, telling him that no hunter would be foolish enough to follow such a rule. Just then, someone mentioned that the spiders were approaching. A boy holding a sword was visibly trembling, but he tried to calm himself. He reminded the others that they could defeat the spiders if they stuck to what they had learned. As one spider jumped toward them, the boy swung his sword effortlessly, slicing it down in a single slash. Another boy used his shield to protect himself, while a girl with a magic staff cast spells, attacking the spiders with bursts of energy. Tahin thought to himself that, for a D-ranked team, their performance wasn't bad, and he didn't have to worry about them too much. However, Tahin was taken aback when he saw the large group of spiders. He hadn't expected there to be more than a few dozen. As the spiders rushed to attack, Tahin drew a fire-based weapon and began fighting back. He noted that the durability of each legion spider was fairly low, even among ranked monsters. He realized that even without using the blade itself, all they needed to do was release a bit of sword ki to defeat them. At this rate, he would be able to finish the raid without even losing a weapon. Suddenly, Shin heard a few hunters calling for help. The river was surrounded by a large number of spiders. The boy with the shield warned that the spiders wouldn't stop coming, and that only a few hunters had done the reconnaissance. The second boy mentioned that things were going to get rough, and the girl with the magic staff was also reaching her limit with her mana. Tahin glanced at Shin and suggested they move toward the trouble, then told Shin to follow him. Shin, however, responded that Tahin should go ahead and help while he finished handling things on his side. Tahin was surprised by Shin's reaction, but before he could respond, a spider jumped at Shin. Tahin shouted for him to get down, realizing that Shin could easily get caught up in the attack if Tahin used his sword recklessly. But Shin reacted quickly, opening his eyes and shaping his power into a square form above the spider. With a swift movement, he launched his attack, killing the spider instantly. The creature collapsed at his feet. Shin thought to himself that, of all the weapons he could currently make, the sword was the one with the greatest craftsmanship. It would be the most effective for dealing multiple hits and pouring power into them all at once, something impossible with his current mana reserves. But if he could harness his power this way, there was nothing better. Shin focused his energy, directing it like a sword, and with a swift motion, launched it at all the spiders in his vicinity, cutting them down in a single strike. Tahin watched, surprised, as Shin stood atop the head of one of the fallen spiders, his movements calm and precise. That's it for today. Make sure to subscribe and comment below with your thoughts on this recap. Thank you all for watching.